let's see here. With the Bible. Oop. I was cold this morning. Went and busted out the pajamas. I get used to that hot weather and then a cold front comes. We had this frigid 7-degree weather. Actually, it was like 60s yesterday. It's actually like 40s in the morning, I think. We're in Proverbs. Let's find the book of Proverbs here. It's one of my bookmarks. Proverbs chapter 18. And we are in Okay, I think we're in verse 13. Looking back on where we were last week. So, verse 13. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. So, there are a few proverbs that are great to put together. You know, this is actually the first time I think I've taught verse by verse through the whole book of Proverbs, because when we did it as a church, I started that way. And when we got to where the Proverbs really get rolling, which I think is, what is it? Verse 8, 9, or 10? 10, I think. Yeah, 10. The wise sayings of Solomon. Starting in chapter 10, and you can even see in my Bible, it's starting in chapter 10 that the highlight colors kick in. Boom! And then all of a sudden I've got everything all color coordinated. There you go. A little closer. But yeah. And it's because, you know, there's all these different topics that are being covered. And so we actually lumped them together. And I actually didn't necessarily teach every single proverb because so many of them are so similar, I wasn't going to repeat them all. But what's beautiful is when you find the proverbs that have to do with the tongue, which is pink in my color coding system, when you put them all together and look at them all side by side, you might have 20-some similar proverbs, but that you can really narrow it down to 5 to 10. But that 5 to 10, when you put them side to side, it gives you a really great teaching on watching your mouth. And so he who answers a matter before he hears it, right? We also know the proverb, and I don't know off the top of my head which proverb it is, but where you, when one person shares their side of the story, they seem right until you hear the other side of the story. And so all of this has to do with basically the importance of making sure we have all the information before we move to action. And yes, quite often when one person shares their side of the story, you know, yeah, your wife sounds really horrible. Yeah, wicked woman. I mean, man, who could bear being married to her? And then she shares, you're like, how dare he? So, I mean, that's the thing is like you wait until you hear it all. I will say this is a big word of encouragement. And I feel unqualified to be the one to say that, you know, to me, this is a real sign of Christian maturity. Because it makes it sound like somehow I've matured. But God is doing a maturing work in me. And I've seen the change over time. But 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, I cannot emphasize enough how important I think the verse is, love believes all things and hopes all things. And to give a better understanding of those verses, love believes the best in all things, and love hopes for the best in all things. And he who answers a matter before he hears it, it's a folly and shame to him, because sometimes people assume the worst. They always assume the worst. Now, I'm not asking people to be naive, nor to make foolish decisions, assuming the best when really the worst is the truth, but that we should always hope. Hope that it's not as bad as it may look. And when we finally do hear the whole matter, then we can maybe, believe the worst once we know the truth. But until then, always hope for the best, believe in the best, pray for the best. And then whatever comes, comes. The spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken spirit? I know there's some of us guys in our church who going through physical pain, but as long as their spirit is strong, the physical pain can be bearable. But when you're going through spiritual and emotional pain, it's like physical pain doesn't even matter, I guess, at this point, because when you're broken in spirit, you're broken. And it's kind of hard. There's an in-your-faceness about physical pain, but I do think the emotional and spiritual pain is a deeper hurt. The heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Just one of our generic, but still true, wisdom and knowledge verses. A man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. This is kind of cool. I didn't even color code that one. It's the only one not color coded, actually. There's like, I'm looking over a couple pages. I only have a few that didn't get a color code because I didn't know exactly where to put them, but it's a cool and true statement. In short, God has given you gifts, and those gifts are going to take you places if you walk in them, if you exercise your gifts, you work in the things God has given you. So many Christians, they're too busy, too amused, too lazy, I don't know, to really embrace and walk in the gifts that God has given them. Oh, here it is, the verse I was just thinking about, verse 17. The first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. I knew that proverb was somewhere. This is my proof that I don't study ahead. But there, we already kind of talked about that, right? I mean, yeah, it sounds like it's right until the next person comes. Casting lots causes contentions to cease and keeps the mighty apart. The idea here is that sometimes it's good to just flip a coin. That's the idea of casting lots. You roll the dice, you flip a coin. Why? Because you know what? Sometimes it's just, guys, there's no fair way to say, do you get this or do you get this? Let's flip a coin and we'll take what we take. Okay? Sound fair? And okay. Causes contentions to cease. We're just going to be the luck of the draw and we'll be okay with that. And so there's a wisdom to that. There's wisdom to that. Maybe we don't use this enough anymore, but I'm sure there's probably places and times in our lives where you just say, guys, we're just going to do a random draw and whoever gets it, gets it. Who gets the last sausage at breakfast? That's why I was late, because the kids were trying to cook sausage and stuff. And so it's like, yeah, who gets that last sausage? Well, we'll just draw straws. It's fair. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a castle. And that's very true too. You could hurt people's feelings, and once they're offended, it's like trying to break down city walls. So better to not offend them in the first place. A man's stomach shall be satisfied from the fruit of his mouth, and the produce of his lips he shall be filled. So it's talking about the stomach of the it's tying in mouth and stomach, which obviously have a connection, but it's really talking about that satisfaction that you would get from food. You can have that same satisfaction that is the fruit of your lips, i.e. your mouth can get you into situations that get you in trouble, but they also can put you in situations that are very satisfying. So be cautious with your mouth, because it can set you up to be in a good place if you use it wisely. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. So again, this is a parallel now. We did one on the tongue, now another on the tongue. Again, death and life in the power of the tongue. Now, may I say this, and then we'll do one more verse. So verse 21, death and life in the power of the tongue. There is the word of faith movement. And it's a false teaching and false movement. In many ways, it comes across as nothing less than Christian incantations. Like Christian witchcraft is really what it is. This idea, you got to speak these words, and you're going to speak life and speak death, because the Bible says death and life are the power of the tongue. Here's a problem where we've talked about Proverbs is a book of generalities. We've had this talk, and I got to keep having this talk. It's a book of things that are generally true. They're not they are not recipes that always pan out in the end because they are very generally true. They're very, very generally true. Great things to live by. But you cannot make doctrine like the Word of Faith movement off of a proverb like this one. And this is a key verse for them. This idea of, you're going to speak things into existence. It's just not biblical. And so here we have this idea of death and life and the power. You know what? Yes, death and life are the power of the tongue. And what I think the proverb is trying to tell us is that you can save a life and you can condemn a life, literally, with your tongue. By the mouth of two or more witnesses, these things are established, right? And so it is. Our mouth can say stuff that can get people killed. And our mouths can say stuff as we testify in court that can set people free. But this is not a spiritual binding and loosing. That's not the point. That's a false teaching. There you go. Last one, verse 22. Oh, darn, we're going to finish the chapter. I didn't realize we were only 3 verses away. Well, verse 22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 7, expresses the benefit of being single and expresses his personal desire as a concession and not a commandment that people remain single so that they can serve the Lord. And perhaps the reason you're single is because, sorry to say it, but you're handy and God loves you. Bad news, right? And God's using you in your singleness, and he's opened you up to be available to him in great ways. Because if you become married, man or woman, well, you now have an obligation that comes first. And I've even, had to tell people recently, right? Your family comes first. They come before the church. They come before any ministry. They are your first ministry. And so, no matter what, you will partially disable yourself from serving the Lord if you become married. But people sometimes take that and run with it as if that's God's preference. Paul calls it a gift. In fact, Jesus calls it a gift. Matthew 19, when he's talking about the subject of divorce, and some people are a eunuch, some are from birth, some may have been eunuch, but some, it's from God, and it's a gift, he calls it. Paul refers to it as a gift in 1 Corinthians 7. It's not something you choose. You don't choose to be single for the Lord. He chooses. This is one of those sovereign election things where God decides, this is a person whom I know is wired and fit to be single. Therefore, from their mother's womb I have formed them, and they will be happy single. They will be joyous single. And he lets them be single. But ultimately, I think a stronger truth is he who finds a wife finds a good thing. That ultimately, that is God's primary focus and purpose for most people. So, there's that. Arla, I love you being single too. Just let the record be known. Verse 21, the poor man uses entreaties, but the rich answers roughly. Just showing how rich people can they can be, because they have power, so they hammer, but poor people, they have to beg and ask kindly. I think it's better for us to ask kindly with a poor in spirit attitude. And lastly, now, here's we'll find out which of our friends are reading the NIV. You can still read with us, but we're watching you. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. I don't have the NIV memorized, but I want to say the NIV here is, a man who has many friends will soon come to ruin. Let the NIV translators explain that one. But here, a man who has many friends must be friendly. That makes perfect sense. If you want to be a person with lots of friends, well, be friendly. Isn't it funny how like gruff jerks don't have people flocking to be in their presence? Yeah. If someone who's got to have friends, they need to be a friendly person. Focus on being a friendly person and you're going to find you're going to have lots of friends. But even though there are lots of friends that are good, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And I think it's talking about, if you want to have lots of friends, this is the recipe. But just remember, maybe better than lots of friends is having those close and trusted friends. The people who you can go through thick and thin with. They'll always be by your side. They can hear you out, whatever you have to say. They're even closer than a brother. So, good stuff. All right, chapter 18 is in the bag, people. Woo! Sad news. I will not be on tomorrow. I need to go shopping at the Home Depot at like 6 or 7 a.m. or whatever. I need to be there early. So I'll be there and not here. But bright and early Wednesday, 7:30 a.m., I will be here to study chapter 19 with you. All right. Love you guys. Have an amazing day. And just remember, if you want to have lots of friends, you need to be friendly. So try hard to be friendly today and maybe you'll make some new friends. Oh, it's doing that thing now where it won't turn off. So I have to keep talking to fill up the extra space of time. Or I just keep clicking buttons until it works. One way or the other, we're going to make this happen. See? It's loading. Well, on the bright side, we have each other. What if I hit a button? Will that button make it turn off? Let's see if this button works. Looks like we're still going. Maybe. Oh, this is awkward. Okay, here we go. Logging in. I love these drawn out endings. Thankfully, I can just keep talking. It's a good